Hello there and welcome to another live chapter reading for Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Today I shall be reading from Forbidden Wolf, The Shadow Chronicles, Book 1 by C.R. Robertson. Chapter 1, Tasha. Every day took me nearer to my 21st birthday in a few weeks, a step closer to conscription into the vampire army to kill our mortal enemies, the Lycans. The war had lasted centuries and consumed so many lives that I doubted anyone could keep a tally anymore. So many new recruits didn't survive a year that I doubted I would see my 22nd birthday. After dragging my long black hair into a messy bun on top of my head, I pulled on my Converse trainers. The need to escape pulsed deep in my veins. All the metal shutters in the facility were firmly in place to stop any harmful rays of the sun creeping in to cause death or injury to any of the vampires in the science corps. The metallic scent of blood tempted me towards the feeding hall, my stomach rumbling since I hadn't eaten for days. I tended to pick at human food and drink coffee to keep my stomach filled between meals, since blood was scarce this far into the Amazon rainforest in Guyana. There was no nourishment in human food, but it kept the hunger pangs at bay. My fangs throbbed in my gums like athletes readying themselves for the starter pistol to sound. A bead of sweat formed at my brow in anticipation as I paced to where the commander stored the blood. Would there be any left? The only benefit to enlisting in the army was that I would be given a ration. Right now I had to rely on what was left behind at the end of mealtime or ask my father to share his. He already gave to my little sister, so I hated making him share it 3 ways. I didn't want to be a burden to my family. As I opened the door, the red light bleeped. An almost empty bag sat at the bottom of the fridge. Occasionally, the scientists left some blood for those of us without ration status. As my fangs ripped into the bag to gulp down what remained, my eyes closed in ecstasy. Mother worked in another facility that didn't allow offspring. There she studied lichen pack behaviour and hunted for a rare species of flower believed to be able to neutralise their wolf form. Father studied vampire and lichen genetics here in this laboratory. They were far from the front line of war, since they'd served their 20 years conscription in the army and were now allowed to work in their chosen specialist areas. Stretching and allowing the blood to strengthen me, I began to jog around the facility until the last rays of sunlight disappeared over the horizon. It helped to calm me as I prepared to escape into the nighttime world. My palms itched even as I bounced up and down on my toes. The shutters slowly opened to reveal the inky darkness outside. Night. The aroma of the flowers in the rainforest combined with the distinct scent of every animal out there to form a cacophony of flavours to tickle my senses. My feet hit the edge of the precipice and I flung myself headfirst into the forest, my hands grabbing a branch to swing myself up to the crouch in the tree. My night vision could make out every tree and branch for miles around, detect the tiniest moths drinking nectar from flowers. Freedom called to me like a seductress tempting me to sin. Every day I waited for this moment when I could stop being me and become merely a shadow in the night, just another ghost in this huge ecosystem the humans had yet to explore. It was one of the few places on Earth that the night creatures could roam freely without fear of discovery. My nails elongated into claws that allowed me to leap between branches or climb tree trunks. At times I flew alongside bats as I jumped from one tree to another. The air cooled my skin and allowed me to breathe fully after being locked inside that metal box all day. Freedom made time irrelevant as I joined the other night creatures that I sensed around me in a myriad of emotions. Darkness was my protector from prying eyes below. A large shape caught my attention in the forest basin, so black it blended into its surroundings. I'd seen many jaguars on my travels and had heard rumours of a rare black jaguar in this area of the forest. My pulse leapt with excitement that this could be the big cat I'd been stalking for the past week. Using my claws to climb down the tree, I cautiously jumped the last few feet to try and catch a peek of the elusive beast. Too late I realised it was a black wolf prowling low to the ground. He reared around and snapped his canines. They dug deep into my arm, tearing through my flesh. I retaliated and bit his shoulder to try and force him to release me. We lay on the ground, breathing hard as we stared at each other in horror. Our blood dripped onto the ground from our wounds to permeate into the forest floor. Dead. I was dead. Lichen bites were deadly to vampires, and as much as we searched the globe, there was no cure. I knew that from reading Dad's research. His form slowly changed from a black wolf to a male around my age. There was a feral magnetic energy emanating from the man that screeched danger. The wildness of nature resided in his tawny hazel eyes that met mine, shock in their depth. "You fucking bit me," he snarled, twisting his head as if to inspect my bite on the back of his shoulder. His solid muscles flexed as his body moved, making me feel small and weak in his presence. I imagined my death. It was in a heroic situation where I saved humans from the lichen threat. It never occurred to me that it would be as a virgin lying deep in the heart of the rainforest, on my ass, poisoned by a lichen bite. I lay stunned on the ground, holding the wound that began to throb and burn on my arm. The wolf was well over 6 foot tall, with black messy hair. He was completely naked, and his wide chest covered in ropes of muscles that led all the way down to a substantial cock between his legs. Although some of my friends in college had boyfriends and indulged in sex, no one had caught my attention until this very moment when faced with this naked male. Although I was scared and in pain, something about this wolf had held me in his thrall. This apex predator towered over me with waves of power emanating from him. He glared daggers at me, his eyes glowing amber as his beast emerged. A foreign emotion curled low in my belly and radiated up my spine. Heat pulsed between my legs and made my thighs tighten. Pushing myself onto my feet, I gave him my best impression of my mother, arching an eyebrow and scowling. "Technically, you bit me first, and what the hell are you doing out after dark?" I snapped. His eyes cut away and his jaw tightened. There was an unwritten law out here that daylight hours belonged to the lichens, and the night was earned by the vampires. "You jumped out of a tree on top of me," he said, retaining his deadly stare and shifting the blame to me. No one ever told me that lichens could perform magic, but there was something in his gaze that held me immobile, a mesmerising quality that made me stop in my tracks and stare at him. I waited for the terror I felt when I saw other lichens in the forest. It didn't appear. Instead, my panties felt tight and my stomach knotted. "I thought you were a black jaguar and wanted to see one for myself," I admitted, folding my arms across my chest to try and make me look more threatening. His jaw dropped and he gawked at me. He looked like he was going to say something, but pursed his lips together, his brow wrinkling. My arm throbbed from his bite, and a whimper escaped as the pain pulsed up my arm into my shoulder. My fingers covered my entry. His stare moved between face and my arm. Sighing, he stepped forward. "Hold still," he said, taking my arm in his big hands to study the wound. "It's deep, but hasn't hit anything major. If you clean it out, there should be no infection." "That bite will kill me long before infection sets in," I said, pulling my injured arm away from him. His touch confused me and left me breathless. "You murdered me." His eyebrows shot up, and his lips slowly turned up into the sexiest smirk I've seen in my entire life. Maybe the toxin was starting to affect me because my legs were trembling and my heart thudding heavily in my ears. "You've got that the wrong way round, sweetheart. You've killed me with your bite." He took a threatening step forward while enunciating some of the words in an attempt to make me the villain of this story. "My buddy's uncle was bitten by a vamp last year and died within a few hours." I'd never heard of that before, and even if it were true, it didn't change the certainty that the wound currently pulsing with pain on my arm was my death warrant. "Great," I said. "We're both going to die because you couldn't keep your canines to yourself." The world spun around me. I slid down a tree to sit at the base of it, then rested my head back. All my senses were numb except for the pain in my arm. I should run and escape, but my legs refused to move. There was nowhere for me to go. Nowhere that I belonged. His gaze followed the gesture before slowly coming back up to my face. He copied my actions, his legs tucked up toward his chest to cover his modesty. What the hell were we doing sitting here beside each other? A voice in my head screamed that I should be running away from this wolf who bit me. Another instinctive voice whispered that I needed to stay with this wolf. He leaned his head on his knees and stared at me. "What's your name?" My head canted to the side and my forehead creased. He exhaled heavily. "I'm Levi. Since it looks like we're both going to die, I thought it would be nice to know my executioner's name." "You just can't stop being a dick," I snapped. "You can tell the devil when you meet him that you killed an innocent vampire named Tasha." His deep chuckle should have enraged me, but it sent a shiver of awareness down my spine. "Innocent? Yeah, right." My claws dug into my palms. He was such an asshole. There was no way I was spending my last few hours alive with an arrogant wolf. Pushing myself to my feet, I growled and stomped in the general direction of home. The poison from the wound was already starting to make me feel dizzy and nauseous. Since I couldn't use my arm to climb into the trees, I doubted I would make it back to the facility to say a last goodbye to my family. My fingers clung to a tree as I stumbled, and a strong hand grabbed my uninjured arm. We don't have Why don't we have a truce for the few hours we have left? Neither of us are going to make it back home, so right now we're all each other has. Levi's heat permeated into my back, and I tried to suppress the tremor that rippled through me. There's a cave not far from here that we can sit in. He kept hold of my arm and led me towards his cave. In my head I knew I should shrug him off, but I couldn't fight the strange sensation of safety that it gave me. I wanted to scream and be angry, but the overwhelming feeling was relief that I wouldn't be conscripted for 20 years into the army and fighting a war that I didn't start. I would die free in nature. Father has always complained that I was too much like my mother and that she was too soft for a vampire. She used to tell me stories from long before the war, when vampires and lichens were known as the beautiful immortals. Both species coexisted until something happened and the war began. History reported that the lichens turned against their nighttime masters, wanting to seize power for themselves. In a forgotten time, this lichen and I could have been friends. The burn from my arm leaked into the rest of my body to scorch my senses. I bit into my bottom lip in an attempt to swallow the pain. Wolves had big mouths and lots of sharp teeth that penetrated deeply. At least my bite was only 2 small fangs. My arm felt shredded, the flesh swelling even as I looked at it. Bile bubbled up at the back of my throat when I landed on my knees to vomit the precious blood I drank earlier. "Shit," Levi said, lifting me to carry me against his chest. "I guess my bite really is poisonous to you." My body burned and teeth chattered as I peered up at him. "Did you think I was making up my imminent demise?" His lips twitched. "Yeah, I did actually." If I had the energy, I would have rolled my eyes at him, since it made my father mad when I did that. Right now, all I wanted to do was curl up in a ball and sleep. My temperature soared and perspiration beaded on my forehead and pooled at the curve at the bottom of my spine. His touch soothed me as his fingers swept across my forehead. The cave was just big enough to fit both of us, the bushes outside hiding it from the rest of the rainforest. Our thighs touched, and I was unnervingly aware of his presence, his unnatural heat sinking into my flesh and making me burn even hotter. The night was slipping past hour at a time, every one bringing me closer to death. I'd seen wolves out hunting in the forest, and I'd stayed far from their reaches. Occasionally some had been brought into the research facility. They were vicious, biting and snarling at anyone who came near them. Savage beasts who couldn't control their urges. So why wasn't I terrified of Levi, the way I'd been with those other wolves? Why did I sit here with him, bringing me comfort? I blamed my confusion on the venom poisoning me. His chest expanded as he took a deep breath. "I was supposed to join the army this year. Dad said I needed to improve my hunting skills, so I've been spending time in the forest alone to hone my abilities." He chatted as if we had all the time in the world to talk about life in general. I tried to join him in a pretense. I was just exploring the forest as I'd done for the past few weeks since I arrived here after college finished. If I'd been a bookworm like my sister, I would have been curled up in a corner somewhere reading the latest romance book to arrive at the facility. Vampires were built for speed and stealth, but we definitely seemed to be lacking when it came to romantic genes. My friends at college selected their boyfriends on their abilities, not their attraction to them. They had sex because it was expected, and we should produce as many offspring as possible. We learnt to suppress our emotions from an early age. In the army, my biggest fear wasn't dying in battle. My fate loomed ahead of being added to the breeding program and assigned an anonymous partner depending on each of our abilities. The thought turned my stomach. It was how my parents met. They stayed together because it suited them, but there was no love involved in their marriage. We were rarely all together as a family. "What's it like being a wolf?" I asked, my head falling to his shoulder because it took too much effort to hold it up. I shouldn't feel this comfortable with a wolf, but for the first time in forever I felt at peace. Maybe vampires and lichens were friends before the Great War started and brought each other comfort. At times my wolf's quiet, but I always know that he's there. When he emerges, then everything is so much more vibrant and alive. Sounds weird. He chuckled, and it washed over me like smooth chocolate on my tongue. "What's it like being a vamp?" I shrugged. "I only have one form. Some of the older vampires have developed gifts over the years, depending on their bloodline. But I'm nothing special." My voice sounded wistful even to my own ears, as if I wanted to be special. All I'd ever wanted was to blend into the background. Vampires who exhibited unusual gifts were taken away from everyone and sent to our coven leader. Mother made sure when I started to show my ability to tune into all the different species around me that I knew never to show it. She taught me to blend in, to become invisible to those around me, to hide in plain sight. "Why is your wolf black?" He slid me a side-eyed look. "Our colour is linked to our abilities. Mine means that people tend to leave me alone. My mouth opened in an O, but I didn't push my curiosity any further. Maybe he did possess magic, and that's why my eyes kept falling to his full and sensual lips. Normally I was timid around men, but obviously dying had eradicated those barriers, since I snuggled closer to him. Levi, yeah, I don't want to die. My mouth was so dry my tongue felt like it would crack. My head was throbbing with my pulse pounding in my ears. I desperately wanted to cry, but even my tears were no longer working. Me neither, he replied softly, his fingertips finding mine. None of the boys at college created sensations like this. We were stuck in a cave and dying from each other's bite, but there was something about Levi that brought safety. I didn't even feel safe in the facility. Going to hunt for scraps of food after everyone had left, jumping out the door as soon as it opened and staying away until the first rays of sun breached the horizon. Sitting here, I admitted to myself that I had never really fitted in with the rest of the coven. Mother had been the same way. I often wondered what she really did in that super-secret research facility, far from prying eyes. Right now I needed her here with me. Another wave of nausea engulfed me, and my vision became so blurred I could barely see the hand I held in front of my face. Levi, yeah, I can't see and my arm has gone numb. Fear gnawed deep inside me like a hungry beast trying to claw its way free. Me too, sweetheart. My fingers threaded through his because I needed some form of contact right now. Levi was the only one who could provide that. I trembled as another wave of pain and nausea crested over me. He shifted us until I was curled on my side with him wrapped around me, my back to his chest. I clung to his right arm, my head resting on his left arm. He tucked his head into where my right shoulder met my neck, his hair tickling my face. In a different world, we could have been friends, I muttered, all my senses starting to close down till there was nothing left but the two of us in this tiny cave. In a different world, we would probably have been lovers, he replied to press a light kiss to my neck. My first kiss, and just as I was about to trundle off this mortal existence. That was a depressing thought. Chewing on the corner of my lip and summoning what was left of my courage, I turned my head toward him. I'm about to die, and I've never been kissed. Would you? His lips descended on mine before I had the chance to finish my sentence, his tongue finding its way into my mouth to stroke against mine. It tasted of the wildness of nature and a hint of something uniquely Levi. His domination stole my breath, and he devoured me in a way I never anticipated. He finally broke away, pressing one last kiss on my swollen lips. We definitely would have been lovers, even though we were born enemies. He wrapped me in his arms again, one hand splayed over my stomach. Life was such an asshole to allow me to finally find someone who sparked my interest, then kill us on the same day. Soon I was unable to feel my fingers and toes, my body growing cold even as an inferno burned deep in my core. I felt his heavy body slump against mine, his limbs slack and his fingers no longer gripping me. Please, I whispered to everyone and no one. Please don't let us die. Darkness crept closer like a harbinger of doom. My fangs hung low in my mouth, the scent of his blood surrounding me, the beat of his heart coaxing me to taste him one more time. I had never experienced anything like his blood earlier. If I was going to die, I might as well live my last few moments. I succumbed to one last temptation, biting into Levi's flesh. White light blinded me, and Levi jolted behind me, his canines scraping my skin. I wanted him, needed him with an appetite that demanded to be satisfied. His blood flowed through me, nourishing and strengthening my body. I felt his emotions strumming through me, his fear and attraction matching mine. Did feeding from the vein always feel like this? I'd been missing out, and our leaders were lying to us. My tongue lapped at the wound, desperately trying to get the last few precious drops of his blood as his flesh closed over. Desire snaked deep in my belly as physical hunger was replaced by another type of appetite, my flesh burning for an alternative reason to the fever that gripped me a few moments ago. My fangs throbbed and the flesh between my legs pulsed. For the first time in my life, I finally felt like a vampire. Never before had I believed that a vampire could harm a human and drain them, but right now I wanted to tear into Levi's flesh and feast on him. I wanted to sacrifice myself to the call of flesh and blood and scream my desire into the night. If I didn't grab control of my emotions and hunger right now, the poison in my bite was the least threat to Levi's existence. I hope you enjoyed that chapter reading and that you'll go check on the book. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.